Welcome to Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins, joined shortly by co-host, fellow immigration attorney Matthew Archambault out of the great city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This week we're joined by a New Hampshire immigration attorney, Ron Abramson. This is like my third take. People don't understand. I can't say Abramson. I just did. Ron is a great guy, and he talks about life in the Trump administration and, basically his experience dealing with white nationalists who have put him on blast. And we talk a little bit about the caravan, which we're hearing a lot less about now that the election's over, and also Trump's policies to make it harder or impossible to apply for asylum, even though we have statutes on the books that deal with this issue. It turns out the rule of law, the party of rule of law, what they mean are, the rule of certain laws, basically. So anyhow, it's an interesting conversation with Ron, and Matthew and I talk a little bit about politics and stuff at the end. So you're definitely going to want to listen to that. And what else is going on? You can check out the show over on patreon.com/redirect. I think, I've been kind of following this Facebook story, and it just seems like Facebook might be evil. So I don't know. I'm contemplating moving away from Facebook. The one concern I have is I do have a lot of friends. I do have friends and family, friends from all over the world who I don't really communicate with in other ways other than through Facebook. But that's just a pretext because, I could get their phone numbers, right? Anyways, I'm having my internal dialogue out loud on the intro of the show, which I'm sure Matthew will appreciate. So anyhow, we might be moving away from the Facebook page. What you should do is head over to patreon.com/redirect. I've been trying to post more there and post, something to read at least once a day, an article or something to think about, and fooling around with video and posting the videos over there. And by the way, you can become a patron there, and that's when you agree to send us a little bit of money every month. It's really easy to do. And it doesn't have to be a lot. Chip in a couple dollars, and we'd really appreciate it. We do donate for anything over $10 a month. We donate the rest to the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. So maybe you're too lazy to donate money. What you can do is just become a patron of this show. Send us $50 a month, and we'll send your money to the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. That's one cool thing to do. What else can you do? I opened a little artist shop. I don't have a lot of art over there, but if you go to redirect.threadless.com, you can get a T-shirt or a hoodie or a sticker of the Redirect logo. We have a listener who designed us a new logo, and it's, going to be honest, pretty great. And so if you like the show and you want to show off your love of the show, you can get a little sticker. You can put it on your laptop, get yourself a shirt. I also have the Robbins Law logo, which is pretty cool. It's a R cut out of an apple, basically. It's pretty cool. So, yeah, check that out, redirect.threadless.com. We don't get a lot of money from this, but a little bit. So maybe you don't want to be a patron, but you want to support the show. Buy yourself a hoodie. It's a win-win. You win because you have a hoodie, and I win because I get some money. So check that out. Enjoy the conversation. And what else can you do? Oh, subscribe on iTunes. We're also on Stitcher. And yeah, check it out.
But I'd like to get to know you. Yes, I would. But I'd like to get to know you if I could.
Yeah, now we are.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So, Ron, you live in New Hampshire?
I do. Lovely, snowy, sleety, icy New Hampshire.
And you run in that? I'm curious how this works. I mean, are you not just sliding all over the place?
Sometimes.
Do you run in spikes?
Pretty good life metaphor to take 2 steps forward and 1 step sideways.
Well, I mean, have you thought about getting a treadmill?
I thought you were going to say, have you thought about getting professional help?
That's me. That's my line.
I have access to several gyms with plenty of treadmills, and that is an absolute last resort.
Okay. Because it's not the same, right? Like you don't get the same amount of exercise. Is that right?
No, it's just boring AF.
Oh, okay. Just boring.
You always end up right back where you started.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Well, isn't that true when you run outside? I mean, unless you're running to a destination, aren't you ending up back at your house?
But at least you saw some things along the way other than
Have you?
A wall
Have you?
Or cable news.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the demographic makeup of your clientele. What is the immigrant population of New Hampshire like?
Well, as you know, reliable numbers are hard to come by.
We want specific data.
You want me to quote the census figures?
Hard numbers.
New Hampshire, by many accounts, is about 4 to 5% non-white, and that is an increase over historical numbers. But in terms of the number of different immigrant communities, I mean, we have many different communities, and they're just not high raw numbers. Our clients tend to be, as one of the few Spanish-speaking lawyers in the state, my clients tend to come from Latin America. I have plenty of Mexican and Dominican clients, Colombian clients. We have Brazilian clients. There's a pretty significant Brazilian community in northern Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire. And then we have a smattering of Asian and European clients, and we also do business work. So depending on where companies are drawing their talent pools, we have a lot of Indian technical workers, H-1Bs, and a pretty good mix. I mean, not huge overall volume, but a pretty diverse mix for a little out of the way state. Also students, international students at the various universities make up a part of our clientele. So we have clients from pretty much everywhere.
So in New Hampshire, now I know New Hampshire. I have family that lives there. I was born in Massachusetts, and as we're kind of alluding to, it's awfully white. What I know about New England, it's kind of a weird mix, right? It can be very liberal and progressive, but there's also this other part that's kind of underbelly. And how are things going in New Hampshire? How are the dynamics of like the politics up there in society right now?
It is interesting. I moved to New Hampshire in 1993, and it was a solidly Republican state, but that was a sort of old school Republican model, more fiscal conservatism, a fair amount of libertarian ideology sprinkled in, and then relative, if not social liberalism, at least social moderate positions on a variety of different issues. But it's definitely changed, and it's far more purple and seems to be trending blue. So we had an interesting election. The Democrats took over both the state Senate and the House of Representatives, which has 400 members. But the governor narrowly won re-election, relatively narrowly won re-election, but as one of his party members stated, with no coattails to speak of. He didn't carry anyone else with him. And we also, the Democrat won. We have 2 Democrats who are representing us in the House of Representatives, along with 2 U.S. senators are both Democrats. So at the moment, to the extent that we are a state that tends to flip fairly often, it flipped blue this time around.
Now, one thing that we're noticing in politics, I guess in society, generally now is there seems to be an increase in, I guess, outward hate, outward bigotry. I do want to take a step back and say that, I believe this country has always been kind of racist and bigoted. But it seemed that was kind of the dark underbelly that, people kind of kept to themselves. But now it seems like people are a little bit emboldened to be a little bit more outward bigoted and racist. And we know that you've actually have experienced this firsthand. So, do you want to kind of explain, what has kind of transpired with you and also from your perspective being a Latino and a Jewish attorney stuck there in New Hampshire? What have you seen?
Right. Well, I am the self-proclaimed president of the Chilean Jewish Bar Association of New Hampshire.
Wow. So what do you guys do for your meetings?
It's president for life. I'm very proud of that. So, it is an interesting state. I mean, we have a sort of there's nothing really urban here, but we are close to a lot of things. We have a coastline. I live about an hour from Boston, about an hour from the beach, about an hour from the mountains. And we have a mix, and we were identified by sort of libertarian interests to be a project, an experiment called the Free State Project, which was to encourage people to move en masse, such as it is, to New Hampshire and try to influence policy towards a more libertarian approach to governance.
When was this happening?
May or may not have. Well, they've made small steps that haven't seemed to have gained much traction. There's always a libertarian on the ticket for the big races here, but the
thing is, like, when you're living in your mom's basement, it's hard to just pick up and move to a new state. You know what I mean?
It is tricky, and that actually is a pretty good lead into my own personal experience. So I am pretty visible, pretty outspoken. I know Matthew. I don't know you yet, Stephen, but I don't shy away from proclaiming what I think and trying to do what's right, both in terms of at work and in the community at large.
You got a sexy bod.
What?
You got a sexy bod. I mean, you stand out, is what I'm saying.
Well,
and it's the hair,
really,
the hair.
More than anything, is what draws attention. So I'm
going with the bod. I'm going with the bod.
Well, thank you.
Stephen, must everything be sexual with you? Ron, I apologize. This happens all the time. All the time.
With him, you can't take him anywhere. Yeah. But ironically, he's gone anywhere. He said probably at home, at the office. So,
mom's basement.
I heard about a group of interfaith supporters who were going to walk 40 miles over the course of 4 days in August to end up. They started in Manchester, New Hampshire, at the ICE offices, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and they walked to Stratford County House of Corrections in Dover, New Hampshire, and they did this to raise awareness of the plight of detained non-citizens of all stripes. And it was just that. It was a consciousness-raising endeavor. They got some press, and I wanted to participate and could not take 3 days off work. They were finishing on a Saturday, August 25th. So given that I've run a few long distances in the last 10 plus years, I decided, despite no training, that I would start at 5:30 in the morning from the ICE office, try to run about 35 miles and catch them with 5 miles to go.
Isn't that really kind of showing off?
I just like to think of it that I got a late start and I had to catch up. That's all. That's all it was about for me.
I mean, and was the car broken down?
It was wonderful. They're an amazing group of people. The interfaith social justice community with whom I've been working ever more closely in the last couple of years is really just the best of the best people. And they state their faith and they live it and they practice it every day.
Well, that's nice of them to let you in.
Inspiring. Then, right. And exactly. Despite that, they let me associate with them. So I met up with the folks in Madbury, New Hampshire. We walked it into the jail. The jail, the county officials actually had set up a tent for us. They were expecting us. It was all a very positive event. It got a small amount of press coverage. And by the time I checked my email that evening, I found a message that was a congratulatory message to me, indicating that I had been included in the New Hampshire Nationalists anti-white list for my, quote, immigration activism. And in that email, again, directed to me, was a photo that had gone out with an early press release about it, of me holding my then 2-year-old son and running next to my wife at the end of a local 10K race, along with all my office information and the characterization, which is not inaccurate, of me being a, quote, Jew lawyer, the triple parentheses, which designate Jewish identity, were around my name. And it was
that what that means?
Signed by someone named Trevor Jefferson.
Oh.
And that was that.
Wow. So have you had any follow-up from these people?
So I made reports to my home police department, my office police department, the New Hampshire Attorney General's Civil Rights Division, and just called a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And we're all lawyers. We know how to coldly analyze a situation, even if we're involved. And I didn't really think there was a criminal charge. Arguably, it could have been harassment, but it would have been a tough sell, and certainly not enough to convict. And I also don't think it's really worth feeding these people with attention, which ends up being oxygen, even negative attention. So I didn't share that publicly until the president proudly proclaimed himself a nationalist. And then this was sort of contemporaneous or just before the shootings in Pittsburgh, which affected me very, very directly. I have 2 people I'm close to who had 2 people they're very close to who were killed. A friend of mine was a patient of one of the doctor who was killed, and the person I work with, his sister-in-law, was killed. So that hit me hard. And that's when I decided to share this, and a lot of people shared it. I want people to know what's going on. The initial blog has been taken down, and nothing has come of it in terms of any follow-up, any direct harassment to me and my family. Thank goodness.
So it wasn't just an email, it was a blog post that was...
Correct. I got an email, and then there was a blog that had a list of over 100 people in New Hampshire, a rather diverse group in which, many of them I would consider to be flattering company for me to keep. But it started with the governor, and I was the second to last person to make the blog before the blog got taken down, maybe by Google. And the very last person was an African-American candidate for U.S. representative named Eddie Edwards. And the entire staff of Catholic Charities, pretty much anyone who's promoted any diversity or anything involving inclusion and diversity,
or being nice,
made the list.
Not being an asshole.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, anyone who's promoted not being an asshole or opening doors for other people.
Pretty much. But that's sort of the takeaway. And so they didn't actually track this person to New Hampshire. A detective made some inquiries. He thinks the person may have been living down south, which is just disappointing that we can't even have our own homegrown white nationalists. We have to outsource it. I just feel like, there's not a lot of pride in that work anymore like there used to be. Mm-hmm. But I thought the issue was pretty much resolved until I got a message this week from a friend that there was another blog by another guy.
Great.
And it had started in October, and it actually started with a rant about the plus-sized model in the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue.
That's important.
Right. I mean, you're dealing with the most important issues of our time.
Actually, Matthew wrote that.
No, it seems like that's up your alley, Stephen. You're the one. No.
So that
I'm pro plus size.
Just a section about the march and the run, and had 2 photos. One, a group photo of us marching, and then the same exact shot that was the the sort of docs card, if you want to call it that, of me that had been on the first white nationalist blog. And this blog was signed. This person used his name, and he actually ran for state representative in New Hampshire in 2010. He did not win, and had a very impressive endorsement from the Third Nation on a explicit white supremacist platform. So this person writes letters to the editor. He's known, but I didn't do anything with this directly because this wasn't directed at me. Just someone discovered it and brought it to my attention, as opposed to the email I got in my own inbox. So that blog, I did share this information, and by the end of that day, that blog also seems to have gone down. At least the contents has been removed.
Yeah. So, I mean, what have you noticed? I mean, obviously these are clear changes, incidents, but other than these two things, have you noticed a change in the just sort of the general atmosphere on a personal level since, let's say November?
Yes and no. We had a contract IT person who would help me with various issues here at the office. We're a small office. We don't have a full-time in-house person. So friend of a friend type had been helping me for years. And one day, probably less than a year ago, maybe 8 months ago, he looks up and says, "Wait a minute. Do you all represent illegals?"
Oh.
So we have a new IT person.
Wait, then he high-fived you and he's like, "Great job." Is that where it was going?
We had to explain that by definition, our entire job is either helping people get or stay legal. I mean, that's the entire definition of being an immigration lawyer. And, he seemed sort of accepting of that explanation, but I couldn't in good conscience continue to employ him after that. And so anecdotally, yes. And it's interesting because I think one of the manifestations of how post November 2016 and social media is that a lot of our circles have become a little more circumscribed. We're possibly in more of a bubble and selective about the people we choose to surround ourselves with. But there's definitely an increase in the sense that it's okay to utter all kinds of comments and just air one's prejudices as if there's no reason to be ashamed and no reason to expect adverse consequences. And that obviously comes from on high, that sense.
Well, I know. So I have a weird thing going on here, Stephen.
You have a weird thing.
Why don't you talk? No. Okay.
You want to be more
better now.
You want to be more specific?
No, it was a sound.
Do not
thing.
be more specific.
It was a sound. So I live here in New Jersey, which is a very Democratic state, very blue. I live in Camden County, which is probably the bluest of the counties in New Jersey. And what my wife is Peruvian, and my mother-in-law lives with us, and she's also Peruvian.
I think you mean
so when they go out.
You live with your mother-in-law, I think.
Yeah, I do.
In the basement.
Words matter.
And, when they go out on the town shopping and whatnot, they tend to speak Spanish to each other. And it's
even though this
only
is
been
America.
Yeah, even though it's America. And only recently have, they've gotten people saying, speak English to them. This is something that never happened before. And these are, in a couple times it's happened, it's been white women, seemingly kind of upper middle class, who, I don't even think people would have thought about doing, especially where we live, right? That would have been something that people would have felt comfortable with. But the kind of the xenophobia that is,
isn't that
kind of becoming norm in our country is emboldening people to really, honestly, just to be assholes to each other.
Isn't that kind of one of the myths of the Trump voter? I think a lot of people have it in their minds that, it's like trailer park folks and, that sort of thing. But it's actually fairly high income, white people.
Well, and even some of these women could have even been, Clinton voters, but it's just that the atmosphere out there is such that it's a lot more permissible now. I know we don't like to think that there are some racists who are also Democrats, but I think that's clearly the case. Lots of places, and clearly people feel more comfortable now. And I think in Ron's situation, this guy is comfortable. I went to his blog site and it said something like, his quote was you're not a free man until you stop caring what people think about you. And clearly this guy doesn't care
in that sense.
Well, and so is this guy, right? He signed his name, and I guess he's somewhat out there. Anyways, out in the open, but just because normally that would be things that people would want to hide, and really you should hide it but maybe. So Ron, do you think that perhaps Trump could be a positive effect, assuming we get beyond this? We kind of bring the trash up, people can have an honest conversation about it, and then our more enlightened ideals will win out. Or am I a fool?
Yes.
That's not mutually exclusive.
I'm not going to get boxed into choosing one or the other. Not disjunctive. But I do think that would be the silver lining in all of this, would be to take sentiments that clearly, by all accounts, predate the current presidential administration. It's just that this president has tapped into that and has sort of weaponized it as a political tool. And with moderate success, well, I guess with amazing success in 2016, and maybe the bloom is off the white rose at this point, based on the overall results and the fact that even a lot of the places that held red, the margins were much closer than they'd been even just 2 years ago. So that would be a great way to turn this into a teachable moment and make some legitimate progress. And I don't know to what extent you can change some of these individual hearts and minds, but at the very least, to raise awareness and have the broader community reject this. That's important. And, that may push people back into the shadows, or it may make people be somewhat introspective and wonder if, this is really any kind of means to any sort of legitimate end.
It is hard to think
Not sure that it is.
Yeah, it is hard to think of silver linings with Trump, but I do think, maybe because I grew up in a really...
His linings would all be gold anyway.
That's true. Silver is for losers. I grew up in a really white area, and I know that there's a lot of people who...
I can hear that in your voice.
Thank you. There are a lot of people. There's a lot of people who just think that racism ended in 1964. MLK came along and was like, "Hey guys, let's not do this," and we stopped doing it, and that's it. And
we passed a law in '64 to give those who ain't got a little more.
And maybe this will wake some people up to realize, oh, okay, this is still a thing that's happening. I mean, maybe. But I wanted to ask you real quick, because we're taking up a lot of your time. You're really critical of our president. But you got to admit, he's pretty much nailed this caravan thing, right?
Well, I tried to get 2,000 of my closest friends to join me for trick-or-treating as the caravan, because I figured for certain people in our neighborhood, that could be the absolute scariest costume we could have come up with.
Mm-hmm.
But I could not, I couldn't rally that many. I mean, I have a lot of kids myself, but it's only 4 total.
Right.
And three
That's
of them
pretty much a caravan.
so that wasn't super helpful. But yeah, no, I mean, who knew that this was just a political rhetoric and an attempt to demagogue before a very challenging midterm election? I mean, it's so hard to predict that unless you've been paying attention to anything for the last 2 years.
Well, now it sounds like maybe you don't support the troops.
I love the troops. I'm actually pretty relieved for the troops that they have been mobilized to a place that is going to be relatively safe. I hope no one throws a rock at them. If they do, I hope they throw a rock back at worst, but they could also do the paper or scissors option. Paper would defeat rock. Mm-hmm. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. But it is, I mean, even Secretary Mattis has basically said that this is more of a training exercise than an actual military action.
Yeah, I wonder how jazzed up these military members are going to be when they're sitting in a tent on the border, putting up wire on Thanksgiving Day, and their families are, hundreds of miles away from them. I wonder how that's going to go over for the morale. I mean, because it's one thing to sell them hey, you're in Afghanistan fighting terrorism, keeping us safe, as opposed to you're sitting on the border, really absolutely doing nothing.
Can we put keeping us safe in big, giant air quotes?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
You didn't see me?
I think that was
we don't
implied.
have a video.
Okay, I didn't see that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's an interesting. You've all dealt with, and I have dealt with, and have friends in law enforcement, and who either serve or have served in the military. And the problem is that a professional military person and a professional law enforcement person will tell you it's their job to follow orders. They don't tend to question them, and that can have devastatingly tragic results if they do question orders, which I understand. So really, it's up to the wisdom of our leaders not to put our people in harm's way illogically or for no valid security reason. I mean, where does militarizing the southern border fall in terms of sending troops for how long has it been to protect oil interests?
Right.
Not sure how you rank those things, but
Bush just got an award, right, for how he treats veterans. Joe Biden gave him an award for his work with veterans. So that's how. Anyway.
Yeah, I just railed. I just did a race recently, and they were asking us all to raise money for quote unquote veterans, and I have such a problem with the fact that we live in a society where we even need to raise money privately to support the needs of veterans. That should never.
How about we stop creating veterans? That's my big thing.
Wonderful. That would be an absolutely wonderful outcome. Now, we can have a Veterans Day, but let's have fewer and fewer people that we need to pay homage to.
Honor.
Now, President Trump did use this opportunity to issue a decree or an executive declaration, making it harder or impossible, I guess, for some people to even apply for asylum. And in the meantime, they're also shutting down lanes at the ports of entry, creating, I don't know if you guys have seen the pictures of these massive lines. Ports of entry are funny things. It turns out people in their normal lives go back and forth between Mexico and the United States, and this is causing a major disruption. And do you guys have any thoughts on just, another effort by the administration to, make legal immigration that much harder?
Well, I mean, one thing I think people should, when they view about when they're shutting down, lanes for ports of entry and all that, if you live in if you live by New York City, for example, if they decide to shut down the Lincoln Tunnel and the George Washington Bridge, right? That's going to have a massive effect on people being able to get into the city, to work, to commerce, and all that. It's the same on the border. So I don't know exactly why they're, what that plan is. But, so don't think of it as this big security measure. all it is, it's really hurt. It's going to hurt the commerce of places like El Paso, Texas, San Diego, things like that. But the overall, writing a memo to basically invalidate a statute, I cannot believe is going to be held up in the courts.
Agreed. And so much of this is legally and constitutionally questionable, and I believe it was the ACLU was already prepared to file litigation, and the overall success rate on these challenges has been extraordinarily high, which should tell you something. But there are no real consequences to the individuals. Nothing ever comes of this. There's no sort of follow-up contempt. I mean, I wish there was a contempt of Constitution provision where something doesn't just get struck down, but somebody is held accountable for a flagrant attempt to violate our Constitution, especially when they've taken an oath explicitly to uphold it.
Right. Now, Ron, people tell us our show is a bummer, and that's true.
And that was before I came on.
That was before.
Imagine how they're going to feel now.
Exactly. We've just made it worse. And so Matthew and I have been talking about trying to share some sort of uplifting story because, our lives are terrible and life in general is terrible. But it turns out we also do help people and good things. You wouldn't know it from listening to the show, but good things do happen to us from time to time. So do you have something positive to share?
I do, from this week even.
Wow. Okay, let's hear it.
So I appeared with 2 clients at USCIS for an adjustment of status interview, where the U.S. citizen spouse petitioned for his much younger non-U.S. citizen spouse, same-sex marriage, 30-year age difference. A couple of issues with a waiver. We needed to do a J1 212E waiver, which your immigration nerds will understand and which no one else needs to understand.
I've literally never heard of that. I don't know what you're talking about.
You really don't?
A J what?
Just move on. Just move on. I'll explain it to him.
We had to get a waiver,
mm-hmm.
and that came just in time.
Okay.
And we appeared for the interview. Had a very interesting sort of side conversation about some of these doxing and other issues with the examiner, who I've known for a long time, and who's an interesting person politically. But case was solid. The clients testified and answered questions very consistently about their relationship, about their lives together, and they were incredibly nervous. And the officer finally made it clear, without saying so, that he was going to approve the case. And they didn't get that. And I finally had to say, it's okay. It's being granted. And they both just let these huge sighs out. And the older gentleman, who had lived most of his life in the closet, right after started crying and thanked me and said he had lived so long, he had hid who he was for so long, he never thought he'd have a chance to be happy.
Wow.
And now he met someone and they seemed to be extremely happy, and we were able to take part in that and help them, remove the barriers to being together and building a life together. And that is, those moments become, fewer and further between these days because of all the challenges, but that's really what sustains us, at least me, in terms of what I do for a living.
Right. For Matthew, it's just the money.
Yeah, he's all about the money.
All about the money.
Matthew would tell that story.
Green.
Matthew would tell that story, leave out the crying, and then just mention how he went back to the office and counted the stacks of money and how happy it made him feel. All right, Matthew, what about you? Do you want to share something, uplifting?
Jimmy Butler's a 76er.
Ugh.
That's...
Give me a break. All right.
I don't follow lacrosse.
No, I don't.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything. I don't know. It's been a kind of a slow week. Nothing tragic has happened with my clients. I think nothing.
Yeah, we're asking for
people get approved that. Here's the thing, right?
That sounds like a great week, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is, right, we've had approvals, throughout the week. People have gotten approved for U visas, permanent residency, and all that. But, lots of times what we do when they get approved in those manners, we're not, it's something that we've filed, and, it's nice when the client comes in and all that. But, not every life-changing event that we participate in, are we sitting next to the person when it happens? So like when Ron, when you say that, when you're there at the interview, it is really nice because you can see it the moment that it happens. But, so often, we've fought so hard to get, a U visa or a permanent resident or some type of benefit. And then the person comes in like a week later to pick up their card and all that. And by that point in time, they're kind of over it, and they're like, oh, now what do I have to do next? And, there's a lot of, okay, we have to do this and that. So sometimes we do miss the initial rush of those things. Doesn't mean that positive things aren't happening. And I think for the vast majority of our clients, I think positive things do happen, except for Stevens. But
well, certainly if you're like the three of us, I would hope, experienced enough and honest enough to give people the straight account of what they can expect from the beginning. And by selecting cases on which we think we can make a difference, by definition, our results should be pretty good. I mean, there's still some disappointing losses, and sometimes they make sense under the law. They don't make sense under any kind of moral structure. But
that's for sure.
It's very difficult. It's not very difficult to have a decent success rate if you know how to pick your cases pretty well at this point.
Yeah, I think that's true. I've got a quick one. So I do have a client who was.
I don't think we have time.
Okay. He was.
I have a quick one. No.
That's what she said. Whoa.
What? Okay.
Oh boy.
That doesn't even.
Go ahead.
You do edit this show, right?
No.
Not as much as I should. But anyways.
You should.
I know. Believe me. Everybody's saying it. So a client who I'd been out of touch with for a long time. So these U visas for our non-immigration lawyers, it's a visa for victims of crimes. And it used to be that when I started practicing, they'd take, 10 months or so. And over the last few years, they've become very backlogged. And now we're getting around to decisions from cases from 2015. And so I had kind of lost contact with this client. And the last time I saw him, he wasn't doing so good. He'd been in an accident and I think was on some pain meds, and things were just not going great, I could tell. And we were struggling to track him down, and we weren't able to get a hold of him, and his family didn't know where he was. And I was just really fearing for the worst. And so we were finally able to set something up, and I was expecting like a homeless person, just missing teeth and doing really, really, really bad shape. But they came in and they looked great, and they'd actually been in rehab because they had some issues with the pain meds after the accident, but they've recovered. And the news that you're now here with the blessing of the government, and you can get a work permit, and was such a relief to this person. It made me realize so much of what we're doing, people say, oh, we want open borders and we want amnesty and all these big, scary things. But really that's kind of true. But it's also true that what we really want is like really basic dignities for our clients, like the ability to go get a job, or live a life without this constant fear. And so it was nice to see that cloud sort of being lifted for this particular client. So anyhow, Ron, thank you for joining us today. It's great chatting with you.
Appreciate it. Always a pleasure.
And Matthew, Hi. We'll talk to you later.
Don't you think we should add right now that we are getting into the holiday season and we got merch?
Oh, yeah. I set up a little store. You can buy stickers and T-shirts and whatnot with the new redirect logo. Hoodies. And I'll put a link in the show description because I don't know what it is off the top of my head. But yeah, get yourself a shirt.
No, get everyone.
Get everyone you know a shirt.
Yeah. It's the holiday season. Like Hanukkah's coming up. How many days of Hanukkah do we get, Ron?
This year, we've had some cuts. It's going to be 7.
Oh, wow.
Is that how it works?
Wow.
Actually.
You know what? Being frugal.
It's a crazy night. But let me just say that when I've appeared on certain media outlets, I usually walk out with some sort of swag, a mug, something. Just saying.
Yeah. Well,
wow.
That's interesting.
Pretty.
Yeah. Just thought you guys might want to know
good.
that.
You hold on to those experiences, Ron.
Yeah, cherish those.
You hold on to them.
Cherish those special times.
Okay, so buy some merch for your friends and family, people you don't like, people you do like.
Yeah.
Because all the proceeds go right to Stephen.
They go straight to me. And
where they should.
Yeah.
Because Matthew's not the only one who's all about the green.
Exactly.
Oh, no.
All right, Ron, take care. Have yourself a wonderful week.
Have a great weekend, gentlemen. Thanks for the opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Matthew.
Yes, sir.
I should probably cut the show off so I don't have to edit any more of your jokes.
Look, a bad joke now and then, it makes us human. We can't all be like, all our jokes can't be like home runs,
Or in the category of jokes.
Yeah, we have to have some like gaffes.
Right. Remember
those are the things that sell.
Remember political gaffes? Remember that?
They don't. Yeah. Yeah, when people said something, then they were kind of like, oops, never should have said that.
Well, basically, the idea of a gaffe, this is me explaining a gaffe to my daughter. The idea of a gaffe was when a politician would say something and then there were consequences.
Can I play the role of your daughter?
Yeah. What's a consequence, Daddy?
What? What are you talking about? No one cares about gaffes. No one even knows what that is.
I'm curious, what do you think happens, because Trump is going to have a heart attack. He's going to go away someday. But this sort of like nastiness, that's like a unique trait to him in some ways, right? I mean, other politicians can't get away with that same thing. Or do you think that sort of part of his personality, his brand, is going to bleed over into other politicians?
I don't know, because I don't really think you see anyone quite like him. I mean, because you see some, I guess we call them firebrands, right?
Right.
Out there, but I don't see anyone really rising to the top. You have like Michael Avenatti, who has his own problems now with getting arrested for domestic violence. But even if he gets through that.
Well, there's definitely definitely no analog on the left. But what I mean is like, what if Mitt Romney?
I mean, but even if you look at Mike Pence, right? So let's take Mike Pence because he would be the successor if Trump gets impeached, and I think we can kind of both agree that Mike Pence's politics are terrible, right? I mean, I don't think his policies would be that much different than Trump. However, I think the rhetoric, did I say it right this time? Rhetoric? I don't even know. I don't know how to talk anymore.
Yeah. Do you have a stroke?
I may have.
Bro.
That's a good possibility. But the way he presents himself, like I think it would be in a more dignified manner. His policies would be terrible, but maybe that would take it down a notch. Maybe people could then focus on the policies being terrible than him saying like mean-spirited, dumb shit.
Right.
Yeah, I think he'll still would say mean stuff, but he would say it in this measured tone, the way Mike Pence talks and blah, blah, blah. And it's hard to get as exercised about it. You would be getting really be getting upset about the actual message and the actual policy as opposed to, Trump whenever he calls people names and all that stuff.
Well, I think it isn't. I think you're basically right. In other words, let's say we had a President Romney. He could do literally all the same immigration things that we've seen because they basically agree on policy. But he probably could not get away with coming out and saying like, "Oh, grab him by the pussy," because that goes against his sort of, the image that he's trying to portray in his sort of brand. And so Trump is uniquely positioned to get away with saying like crazy stuff, but crazy.
But also because we've been conditioned to it with him because, we've known Trump for decades, right? And he's always been this way. So that's kind of who he is. So
right.
It's okay. And he'll even say like, oh, they want me to act presidential. And that's not him, right? He can't do it because he's not a decent human being, because acting presidential means basically acting like a decent human being. So he can't do it, but we're kind of conditioned. We're like, okay, that's Trump. I guess accept it, for what it is.
I guess the question in a way is like, is that Republican base, the 35 to 40% approval that Trump carries sort of no matter what, is that hardcore base willing to rally behind a sort of white bread Mitt Romney in the future like they did in 2012? Or
I don't think so.
And now they need red meat. They need something, branded more appropriately to their taste.
So the people I know that I interact with that like Trump, first of all, they're starting to bleed off too, because even the ones who are rampantly for Trump, even now they're starting to say like, yeah, he's kind of an asshole. And I think it does wear on people. I think the whole Veterans Day thing, the whole stuff in Paris, I think it's like
it was
he's not going to lose support. Yeah, he's not going to lose support by like big chunks, but I think you'll see over time people just start to kind of whittle away, get tired of that. And I don't think another politician. So your question is, could like a John Kasich, for example,
right,
could he energize those same people? Now, I don't think he could. I mean, they might say, oh, well, he's a Republican and he's better than that communist, insert Democrat that would run against him. But I don't know if they would be energized to go out and vote for him. It's just like Hillary. Like Hillary is Hillary that much different than, maybe a lot different than Bernie, but she's a pretty standard Democrat. She just she's not a lot different than Obama, right? But Obama could energize people. And I think that the Republicans, they need someone that are going to energize people via policy. And their policies are kind of bad and shitty for people. So they're really going to have to rethink what they're doing. But Trump will get reelected, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's funny because I talked to a friend the other day, and he's like, yeah, I'm a Republican, but he's just so turned off by all of this. And he was it's sort of like a shout out to Charles Cook, reminiscing about the days of, Reagan, Reagan's sort of version of race baiting, I guess. Anyways, reminiscing about a simpler time in the Republican Party, but I was trying to get him to see like two things. One is, the Republican Party has had sort of these racist identity politics at its core for like a really long time now. And two, they're not coming back. Like he thinks, he's hoping that there will be some sort of great awakening and that the party will return to sort of a generic, churchy, small government kind of thing. And I think that they've turned a corner that they can't go back on. But
well, I mean, one thing that when people talk about people talk about Democrats and Republican voters like they're equal. They're not. There are less registered Republicans than there are registered Democrats. I guess the biggest segment are people who say they're independent, and probably the vast majority of people who say they're independents are kind of full of shit. So,
totally,
people, they love to say, "Oh, I'm totally independent," but they've only voted Democrat in their entire life, or they've only voted Republican. So they just like that moniker. But there are more Democrats,
or they just don't have ideas.
Yeah, they don't have any convictions.
Right, exactly.
But I mean, there are more Democrats than there are Republicans, and the Republican Party. Remember, after Romney lost, they did that whole autopsy, and they said we really have to reach out more to people of color, to Latinos, and all that.
And they were
and then came along Trump.
Screw that.
And then came along Trump, and Trump is he's trying to milk every last drop of blood from the white man, the white male, and then now the white female, and they're becoming less and less of that demographic. So,
right.
I mean, they have to figure something out, and it has to be policy based, because they're not going to find another person. Trump is this once in a lifetime, thank God, or once in a hopefully multi generations time. Individual,
right.
But
yeah.
So I don't think they have anyone that can energize them like Trump. The question is, do the Democrats have someone that can energize them as well?
Right. I mean, what will end up happening is the Democrats will screw the pooch and not seize the moment and allow for some sort of Republican resurrection. So, anyhow,
but do you agree that we need a white male to run?
No. I don't agree. Barbara Lee for president. She's got my vote. I don't think she'll run. But anyways, Matthew, good talking to you. And
good night. Everyone buy our merch.
Yeah, check out this shop. We got this spiffy new logo, and it belongs on your club.
Do we have coffee mugs yet? We should get coffee mugs.
There's mugs. I ordered one.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. All right,
nice.
Matthew.
Yeah, I should check it out.
Yeah, maybe you should check it out. All right, we'll talk to you later.
All right, goodbye. See ya. Bye.